Tonight, we journey into the shadows, unraveling stories of terrifying encounters with entities from realms beyond. If you think you're brave enough, join us as we delve into accounts that defy logic and chill the soul. But beware! Each tale serves as a haunting reminder that some doors should remain closed. Title: The Mask of Deception. The late summer sun was low in the sky, casting a warm amber glow over the campus as students drifted through the quad. A familiar figure moved gracefully among them, catching smiles and nods of recognition from nearly everyone he passed. Henry Blake had that effect on people, the kind of person you noticed, the one whose charm seemed effortless. He was the kind of man who made people feel as if they had known him forever, though they had barely scratched the surface of who he was. In the small college town, Henry had quickly become a popular face. He volunteered at the local library, helped out with community events, and somehow managed to make every interaction feel personal. People trusted him. He was dependable, well-spoken, and courteous, often seen holding doors or offering a hand to strangers. For many, he was simply Henry, the kind, charismatic guy who always seemed to be in the right place at the right time. But as he walked through the quad, a different glint flickered in his eyes. Beneath the friendly smiles and easy laughter lay something far more dangerous, something only those closest to him might have glimpsed, if they had been paying attention. Henry enjoyed control, he thrived on it, and his charm was simply one of the many tools he used to ensure he stayed hidden in plain sight. That evening, as the campus buzzed with excitement for the upcoming fall festival, Henry stood by the library steps, casually scanning the students passing by. He noticed the way some of them looked at him, the easy trust in their eyes, and he felt a familiar thrill. For him, these interactions were more than just passing exchanges. They were rehearsals, subtle dances in which he tested boundaries, reading people's reactions as if they were open books. The memories would come to him unbidden sometimes, like scenes from an old film flickering across his mind. There was one memory especially that lingered. Henry had been just a boy no older than 10 when he first realized he held a kind of power over others. It had started with small things, harmless at first. Moving his sister's toys when she wasn't looking, hiding her favorite things only to offer them back with a feigned look of innocence when she grew upset. He'd been curious, almost scientific, about the way she reacted. The rise of panic, the flash of relief, the way she clung to him afterward as though he was her protector. It had amused him in a way he couldn't yet understand. And then there was the incident with his cousin Julia, who had come to visit one summer. Julia was older, confident in a way Henry envied, and she hadn't been as easily rattled by his tricks. But one afternoon, he'd decided to try something different. While she napped on the couch, he arranged the kitchen knives around her, placing them carefully, meticulously, until they formed a circle around her. And then he waited, standing there quietly as her eyes opened and took in the scene, the realization spreading across her face. For a moment, there had been fear in her eyes, and he'd felt a thrill he didn't fully understand. It was a memory that had stayed with him, not just because of the fear he had seen, but because of the power he had felt in that moment. A power he knew even then he wanted more of. It was 2 weeks before the festival when the first body was found. Emma Lewis, a sophomore who had gone missing after her evening class, was discovered in a wooded area near campus. The news sent shockwaves through the town, a quiet place where crime was rare and murder nearly unheard of. Friends and classmates gathered in hushed circles, speaking in low voices, glancing over their shoulders as if the killer could be standing among them. Detective Evelyn Price was assigned to the case, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for her sharp instincts. As she surveyed the crime scene, she took in every detail, noting the careful arrangement of the scene, the precision of it all. Emma's body had been left almost peacefully, but there was something chilling about the way she lay, as though whoever had done this had taken their time, had wanted to leave an impression. As Evelyn delved into Emma's background, she began to piece together the young woman's final hours. Witnesses recalled seeing Emma with a man that night, someone charming, well-dressed. He had this way about him, one of her friends had said, a note of uncertainty in her voice, like he was someone you could trust. But despite the leads, the investigation stalled. There were no fingerprints, no signs of struggle, nothing to tie anyone to the crime. And as the days passed, the sense of unease in the town grew, the whispers of a killer in their midst spreading like wildfire. Henry was careful, always careful. He understood the importance of appearances, of maintaining his place in the community's trust. But the thrill of what he had done lingered, a dangerous reminder of what he was capable of. He thought back to the way people had looked at him when he joined the search party for Emma, the way they had thanked him for helping. It amused him how easily they had been fooled. Yet there were moments, even for him, when the mask would slip, when he would allow himself to indulge in memories of that night. He would replay them in his mind, examining every detail, feeling again the rush of control, the satisfaction. It was in those moments that he felt truly himself, a part of him that lay hidden beneath the surface, waiting. And he knew that he would do it again in the dimly lit coffee shop where students gathered for late-night study sessions. Henry Blake blended in perfectly. Dressed casually, his arm bound in a makeshift sling. He sipped his coffee as he scanned the room, waiting. His injured arm had drawn a few glances, mostly of sympathy, exactly what he'd counted on. Tonight, he was looking for someone like Anna, the kind of girl who'd notice a person in distress and offer help. And there she was, sitting alone, her gaze drifting to the sling every so often. He allowed a look of discomfort to flicker across his face, leaning just enough to catch her eye. Within moments, she was by his side, concern softening her features. "Do you need any help?" she asked kindly. Faint, grateful smile. "It's nothing serious. Just a little clumsy. I'm afraid," he replied, shrugging. "But I could use some help carrying these books. They're a bit much for me tonight." Anna agreed without hesitation. She followed him outside, chatting away, unaware of the tension that curled beneath his charming demeanor. Henry listened, nodding, but his focus was on every word, every movement. Each step felt like a calculated dance, an exercise in control he'd long mastered. As they reached the shadowed parking lot, he slipped back into his mind, recalling the steps he'd rehearsed countless times. To Anna, he was simply a friend needing help, a polite stranger. To Henry, she was the next piece in a game he alone understood. Back at the police station, Detective Evelyn Price studied the files on her desk, her eyes narrowing at the profiles lining up before her. Each case bore a haunting resemblance. Young women, alone in public spaces, each last seen with a man described as charming, polite, or trustworthy. But beyond that, they had little to go on. Her instincts told her they were close, that the person responsible wasn't a random threat, but someone the victims trusted. She met with her team, reviewing every detail they had. Photos, witness statements, even the minute details of each crime scene. Every thread they could pull at in the hope of unraveling the truth. Her mind drifted to a profile she'd been forming, a gut feeling about the type of person they were dealing with. Intelligent, calculated, someone who could blend seamlessly into the lives of those around him. Someone no one would suspect. Meanwhile, Henry's interactions were beginning to shift. His charm, while still effective, was tinged with an underlying intensity that didn't go unnoticed by those closest to him. Friends started picking up on his peculiar moods, his sometimes intense fixation on seemingly trivial details. During a small gathering, a close friend remarked on Henry's eerie calmness whenever the recent disappearances were mentioned. The friend laughed nervously, brushing it off, but Henry could sense the tension. The mask he'd perfected for so long was beginning to wear thin, and he knew it. He relished the thrill of these near reveals, the rush that came from skating so close to exposure. It was a test, a challenge that kept him sharp. But as much as he craved control, Henry was aware of the risks. the dangers that lurked should he lose his grip. Days later, Henry watched his reflection in the mirror as he rehearsed his next role. This time, he would be a campus security officer, a figure of authority who exuded trust. The uniform was simple, but the transformation it offered was profound. He practiced his lines, the polite yet firm tone, the reassuring smile that would disarm anyone. When he spotted Megan, a young woman walking alone near the university's library late one night, he took his chance. Approaching her, he nodded, putting on the practiced expression of someone just doing his job. "Evening, miss. Just a routine check. There have been reports of suspicious activity nearby. Can I walk you to your dorm?" Megan hesitated, but the sight of his uniform and his calm, friendly demeanor put her at ease. As they walked, Henry felt the familiar thrill settle in, the exhilaration of his plan unfolding seamlessly. He knew every step they'd take, every word they'd exchange. And as they neared a secluded area, his voice softened, taking on a slightly menacing tone. But as Megan sensed the shift and took a step back, something unexpected happened. A passerby called out to them, interrupting the moment. Henry's mask slipped for just a second, a flicker of irritation flashing across his face before he quickly recovered, nodding at the stranger and continuing on. For Megan, the encounter would be nothing more than an odd, unsettling memory. But for Henry, it was a reminder that even the best-laid plans could unravel with a single interruption. Detective Price's team was growing closer. Small connections, tiny details Henry hadn't anticipated were coming to light. They traced the description of a man seen with several victims, a man who seemed to change appearances but maintained certain consistent traits. The more they discovered, the more they sensed the intelligence and cold calculation of the killer. They began piecing together a profile that felt disturbingly real, as though the man they were searching for was hiding in plain sight. For Evelyn, this realization was both thrilling and terrifying. She could sense how close they were, the faint, tantalizing smell of the truth just within reach. As Henry's control started to fray, his inner world began to crack open. Memories of past encounters, both his successes and near failures, swirled within him, mingling with a growing paranoia that kept him up at night. He found himself imagining the police closing in, picturing how they might catch him. In a twisted way, the possibility thrilled him, the idea of a final confrontation where he'd either win or be exposed. But Henry knew he couldn't afford such mistakes. He redoubled his efforts, growing more cautious in his approach, ensuring he left nothing to chance. The days seemed numbered for Henry Blake. The pressure, once invisible, now pressed against his every step, every glance, every calculated move. Since the string of incidents near the university had attracted a fresh wave of scrutiny, Henry knew he was walking a tightrope. And yet, with each reminder of the police drawing closer, a disturbing thrill simmered beneath his calm exterior. It was a delicate dance, one that required equal parts caution and daring. Henry's routine had always been meticulously planned. No move was without purpose. No interaction was ever left to chance. But in recent days, he noticed a slip, an unfamiliar instinct for risk, as if he were taunting the world to try and catch him. And it was during one of these daring excursions that his usual caution wavered. In the middle of a carefully staged encounter, where Henry typically exhibited his usual charm to disarm any suspicion, he spotted someone, a witness, a young woman whose gaze lingered just a bit too long. As he moved forward, keeping his tone warm and assuring, he felt a surge of panic, a rare, unwelcome sensation. But he suppressed it, focused his energy, and approached her, adjusting his demeanor. He asked her name, introduced himself, even exchanged a few pleasantries. She looked cautious, her eyes flitting to the side as if she sensed something was wrong. Henry's smile stretched a bit too wide, his gaze too intense. He felt her slipping away, and the moment she took a step back, his hands clenched. The encounter ended awkwardly, She gave a curt nod and excused herself, her steps brisk, almost hurried. A look of recognition. Could she have known him from somewhere? Henry's mind spiraled. Had he been too conspicuous in recent weeks? Had his name floated around the city in murmurs he couldn't hear? He needed to get a grip. The precinct was buzzing that morning as Detective Fields walked in. For weeks, they'd been combing through reports, witnesses, and potential leads on the recent assaults near the university campus. But nothing seemed to fit. Now, however, an excited call from an officer on the campus team stirred hope. The officer spoke of a young woman who had reported an unsettling encounter with a man fitting a loose composite they'd been circulating among the team. Fields had seen it before, the pattern, the gradual escalation. Henry's trail was now showing signs of overconfidence, an urge that had outgrown his careful methods. Fields wanted to see the woman for himself. The victim, Rachel Lane, was clearly shaken as she recounted her encounter, describing his unsettling stare and disjointed conversation. Although she hadn't recognized him as the predator, her intuition had raised red flags, an instinct that had saved her life. Rachel's testimony added depth to the case, but it wasn't enough to secure an arrest. They needed something concrete, yet Fields felt the pulse of a breakthrough. They interviewed her over and over, each detail driving them closer to a psychological profile, something the public might not see. But within the precinct walls, a new image of their suspect was beginning to emerge. The notion that someone might have sensed his intentions gnawed at Henry. Though he had prepared for a variety of scenarios, this was different. For the first time in years, he felt hunted, observed, and the media had caught on. Small but significant reports linked the victims in oblique ways, mentioning shared characteristics, locales, even the faintest physical descriptors. In his apartment, Henry spent hours meticulously scrubbing every surface, every trace of evidence that could connect him to a crime. He revised his routines, creating gaps between his appearances and outings, yet his mind raced with paranoia. News reports, eyewitness descriptions, police sketch renderings, each hinted that the detectives were close, too close. His obsession with control and precision had now given way to compulsive rituals, an endless rehearsal for his next move, even as his world threatened to collapse. In a dark twist of fate, Henry's paranoia led him to make a fatal error. Convinced he was still unseen and untouchable, he followed another target, a young student named Eva. He studied her movements, her schedule. He mapped her days until he could predict her every step. But this time, she was more vigilant. The moment he appeared beside her, striking up the familiar blend of charm and casual rapport, she sensed his underlying menace. Eva moved quickly, feigning an urgent phone call and making an abrupt turn into a crowded plaza. Henry froze, caught off guard. He made a half-hearted attempt to follow, but Eva had already begun explaining her encounter to a nearby security officer, describing his face, his gestures, his eerily familiar demeanor. The officer radioed for backup, and within minutes, a police car was dispatched. Fields received the call. His heart pounded as he realized the chase was on. Every piece of his investigation came rushing back. The patterns, the psychology, the meticulous nature of his suspect. They had him. This was the turning point. The precinct mobilized, and Fields directed his team. Each officer briefed on the suspect's potential escape routes. Henry's attempt to retreat was futile. The authorities had him surrounded before he could slip away. The weight of his dual life bore down on him as he sat in the dimly lit interrogation room. His calm veneer shattered. Fields entered, locking eyes with the man he'd spent months tracking. The tension was palpable, a war of silence before the battle of minds began. Henry tried to retain control, answering questions in clipped tones, denying the allegations with cold, detached confidence. But as Fields pressed on, unraveling the evidence piece by piece, Henry's calm gave way. He confessed to certain crimes, even as he withheld others, relishing the control he thought he still had. His confessions were laced with twisted pride, each detail chilling in its precision. His trial became a public spectacle. Crowds thronged the courthouse, horrified at the revelation of the man who had prowled their city, hidden in plain sight. The once respected, charismatic figure was now a subject of collective horror. Each word of his testimony, each glance, each smirk became fodder for media analysis, as the city grappled with the magnitude of his crimes.